When we launched this book in Sydney, it was Melbourne Cup Day. We got a fairly good turnout. People were able to drag themselves away from the TAB. For the record, I put my money on a smoky called Red Ruler. Given that this book deals with social democratic politics and the fact that our Labor PM is flame-haired, I think I wrote an op-ed for The Australian a few months back and I called her a ranger. It was an appropriate choice. However, at the generous odds of 400 to 1, it was certainly a case of betting from the heart and not the mind. Needless to say, I did my dough. I think it came dead last. But on that subject, I'd like to wager the odds that the odds of a book on Australian social democratic politics, penned by two young Turks with the names Dyrenfurth and Soutphommasane, would, at least until recently, have well exceeded the odds of Red Ruler. It is indeed a testament to the bravery of our publisher that two of the longest and most difficult to pronounce surnames in Australian life appear on the spine of this book. Indeed, it is amazing that they fitted it all. It isn't only linguistic difficulties, however, that made our book unlikely. The very fact that either of us resides in the Antipodes is very much a fluke. Both of us hail from families lucky to survive the bloodshed of the 20th century. Totalitarian regimes from both left and right led our families to begin new lives in Australia. My family, the Central European Jews, forced to flee their homeland for centuries to escape the Nazis during World War II. Tragically, some didn't escape. And yet, if my presence in Australia owes much to the winds of war, my political orientation was as close to odds-on as possible. While neither of my grandmothers were political animals, and my parents were vaguely left of centre, my dad insists on calling himself a centrist, both my grandfathers were partisan warriors of the left. Sam, my Jewish grandfather, was a journalist who co-founded the Austrian branch of Polizei Zion, the Socialist Jewish Workers' Party. My Antipodean grandfather, a boilermaker named Red Jim, was a stalwart of the local left. He did have red hair and was red, and his politics were red. A lifelong member of the ALP and secretary of his local Trades and Labour Council in central Victoria. In another sense, however, it was the positive experiences of my families in Australia during the second half of the 20th century that led me down the social democratic Labor path. Despite growing up in materially deprived circumstances, both my parents were able to attend universities, the first of their families to do so, and enjoyed successful careers. My dad's experience is a particular case in point. Arriving as a 6-year-old refugee child, whose first language was German, that he would later appear as a barrister and solicitor of the High Court of Australia is a testament not only to his work ethic, but, I am proud to say, the nation that took him in. Friends, we live in a truly great and generous country, and I don't think our side of politics says this enough. It is not only a prosperous nation, but a relatively fair and tolerant place to live. It is not perfect. Inequality is still too high. Discrimination based upon race, gender, and sexual orientation still exists. Parts of Indigenous Australia are basically third world enclaves. From my particular point of view, the tone of debate as regards asylum seekers is a national disgrace. Now, my family background predisposes me to such an attitude, but let me tell you a quick story. For the past year, I've been mentoring a young Tamil refugee lad who's living in outer West Sydney. He is a terrific young man. He already loves Australia, and he's thrown himself into Australian life. Each Saturday goes off and attempts to improve his English. He's playing for a local cricket team and generally loves life in Australia. He wants to attend university so that he can become a policeman. I'm pretty definite he will. He's not perfect, of course. He he's persisting with this idea of getting a tattoo, something I'm strongly trying to dissuade him against. Again, against my best advice, he's decided to develop a love affair with rugby league, a horrible sport, rather than my favourite AFL. Raj is proud of this country. I think Australians should be proud to have people like Raj here having a go. Hopefully, we need people like Raj. Hopefully, in 3 years' time, when Labor celebrates a landslide victory at the next federal election, I'd like to think I can look back, sipping on a cold beer, thinking that the party that I've been a member of for the past 14 years has done its best to push that worldview. But on balance, and don't let me be too negative, this is a wonderful nation. But it is not, as some would have it, because we are the so-called lucky country. Nations make their own luck. In fact, luck has very little to do with it. Good societies are made by their own citizens, and despite the current contempt in which they are held by, shock horror, politicians and political parties. It should come as no surprise then that I, like Tim, like Wayne, like Nick, believe it is the Australian Labor Party that can claim much, if not most, of the credit for Australia's successes and egalitarian temper. Yet, despite holding the reins of federal office and all of the states and territories except for Western Australia, today's party is currently in an introspective mood. No one in this room needs me to tell you why. 2010 was not our greatest year. March 2011 is likely to prove one of the darkest days in the New South Wales branch's history. However, to borrow a phrase from Gough Whitlam, it's time. As the first decade of the 21st century closes, Australia desperately needs Labor up and firing. We face too many serious challenges, from climate change to a renewed productivity agenda and addressing the ongoing shame of Indigenous disadvantage in such a wealthy country, for the ALP to be consumed with self-doubt and political paralysis. And in Tim and I's opinion, each of these challenges, and many more beside, demand a modern social democratic response. That is, government grounded in values of social justice, nation building, and the common good. Good public policy can never be purely evidence-based and conducted in some philosophical vacuum. It must be informed by values and driven by ideas, Labor values and Labor ideas. At that, this book is not simply an argument about the future of Labor. Instead, we see this book as a statement against the lucky country complacency that is seeping back into the national consciousness. Our contemporary prosperity, remarkably uninterrupted for almost 2 decades, with every sign of continuing, places Australia in a unique position to become a beacon of progressive civilisation in the 21st century. It seems indulgent, as many commentators have recently argued, that we must move beyond left and right out of respect for some passing intellectual fashion. And it seems too pessimistic to believe, as with many social democrats around the world, that the centre-left exists only to preserve past gains. Now is not the time for either timidity or despair, but for hope and optimism. Let me quote from a book chapter written by a then humble backbencher 10 years ago in a publication entitled New Voices for Social Democracy, edited by my comrade Dennis Glover. Quote, "Creating a social democratic future for Australia and cementing equity and fairness at the centre of our national life will require the electorate to give assent to fundamental changes. That kind of positive political assent cannot be generated unless there is a return to optimism and the belief that government does matter and that things can change." I couldn't agree more. Indeed, it is to that task of rekindling Labor's progressive mission of promoting optimism and hope, not just within the party, but wider society, that all that's left was conceived. We hope our book provokes a lively debate. I think it has provoked a mild debate, and may have influenced the politician who penned those lines back in the year 2000, our current Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. Now, to conclude, some of you, of course, would know that Julia Gillard drew Red Ruler, that Melbourne Cup smoky, in her office suite back on Cup Day. But she decided to put her hard-earned money on So You Can Think. It was a good choice, as he was the punter's favourite. But he was also the people's favourite, as his trainer Bart Cummings was at the time laid low with an illness. I'd also say that the PM's choice encapsulated Labor's ethos. Hard heads, soft hearts. It's not a bad description of what Labor has stood for. It's a pretty good guide to what Labor should stand for. Thank you.